You've acquired 3 metal fabs so far, all of them in California. Why fabrication and why California?
So I'm an engineer by background, so mechanical in particular, which biases you pretty heavily towards industrials and probably manufacturing more broadly. I gotta honestly say it's partially fun. The other part of it is California is largest industrial state in the country with a lot of manufacturing businesses, a lot of metal fab. It contains actually 6,000 out of the US's 30,000 metal fabrication companies, and metal is the medium that most things are made out of. So I think something sustainable long term, but also going through probably one of the worst succession issues, I think, out of all industry verticals in the country.
Awesome. Well, Jules, thanks for joining me today. By way of introduction, Jules is the founder of Industrial Succession. They're really focused on ensuring that the American manufacturing base carries on into the next generation and grows to new heights. Today, they're really focused on metal fabrication services. They've acquired a number of metal fabricators, and they actually have a couple of deals under contract that they're wrapping up right now. So, Jules, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
What about California makes the problem of succession particularly hard?
I think like number one is the geographical base. I mean, if you think of where most of the money that invests in industrial companies in general is located in this country, it's mostly in the Midwest, right? So, Chicago, Wisconsin, right? PE groups out of that area that invest kind of, throughout that part of the country. East Coast as well would be another part of it. On the East Coast, a lot of, New York money and all that invests in those sorts of industries and then also drives M&A, which I feel is part of the reason why a lot of these businesses stay successful for the long term. California, it's geographically far. And also just, I think a lot of the owners out here, they kind of enjoy owner operating quite a bit more than they like selling and moving on for whatever reason, at least in this space. I know the tech industry is probably pretty different. But, there's just a lot that have formed up here historically. A lot of the world wars have driven also manufacturing out here too, where, they were building planes and defense weapons and all that to support other industries. And over time, they just shifted to other products. And I think there's just never, been that good sense of private money in the space. And then finally, it's just not a culture amongst the young folks here, right? I mean, most young people you meet that, their parents own an industrial business, they're normally saying something like, I'm going to go be a doctor or a lawyer. I'm going to go in the tech industry, real estate, whatever, anything but operating their parents' manufacturing company. So you mix that recipe together, you're going to have a tough time to have succession here.
Sure. You mentioned when we were previously chatting, there are around 30,000 metal fabricators here in the US. Has that number come down over time?
So the industry, for the most part, there's not really more starting every single day. It's usually either M&A consolidation or owners just shutting down and moving on. So it is decreasing, I'd say, from a quantity of companies, but I also do think that's forcing a trend where once you do get to scale, you become exponentially more rare and more interesting to customers.
How do you view the market? What are the key segments within metal fabrication?
So you have your welding. So, kind of fusing multiple metals together. There's certified welding, there's non-certified welding. Technically everything's certified, but there's like actually certified welding that highly differentiates like structural steel, pressure vessels, where you got to get stuff x-rayed and inspected. There's sheet metal, like forming and cutting. So you take sheets of metal and you use lasers and punches to put shapes into them and, cut them down to size. And then you bend them up and put little inserts in them to form boxes and enclosures. And then the last thing would be machining services, where you take a block of metal and then you use a computer guided machine to cut metal away from that block to form a certain kind of shape.
And do y'all kind of run the gamut on providing all 3 of those services within a certain kind of market niche?
Yeah, that's right. So the key is just understanding why the plant does what it does as it relates to those. So for example, aerospace, a lot of that tends to be machining, right? They want to save weight, so they're trying to cut metal away from stuff. Those machine shops tend to just be machine shops, at least in California. So they don't really do the welding and the sheet metal forming. If they do sell that at the end of the day, they probably are outsourcing that and then just combining it with their product somewhere. Welding and sheet metal are often a little bit more often tied together, but sheet metal, I've seen facilities that literally all they do is sheet metal, right? So
Sure.
You really want to understand the core competencies of the facility and the industry requirements. It just happens that currently what we do own actually does do all those in-house with certain ones that are specialties than others, but it's not so common unless you emanate into that.
Who are the common end users or purchasers?
So our customer in Metal Fab is folks from usually either the supply chain, the engineering, or the quality teams at large original equipment manufacturers and infrastructure heavy civil providers. I mean, certain pockets of the country, there's certain industries that are more successful, like, you probably think more Midwest for automotive. California is definitely more like aerospace and defense, infrastructure, data center type pocket of the country. Right now, we have a very like high interest in critical infrastructure. So think like water treatment systems. California water is the new gold. Energy systems, and then transit infrastructure. California is the largest network of roads and bridges in the country, and they're also building metro stations here pretty significantly. So we like to kind of play in what makes sense in the local region.
Sure. And what does the sales process typically look like for getting a new customer onboarded?
There's a few ways to do things in this industry. So I'd say the bad way slash the old school way is definitely a lot more of like you get a call from someone who has got this one-off situation. They're building a project, and maybe it's not even one-off, but they basically behave as if it's one-off, and they skip all the proper steps that ensure successful completion at the end for everybody. So in those cases, it would be like they outreach, they have bad drawings, they didn't really think their product through for manufacturability. They've never made what's called a first article. So you make like a first sample before you do the large run. And oftentimes they just expect, certain metal fabricators to just kind of run through it all as if it's one, and then, make the whole batch as if it was one big first time run or something. So we try to not do that. We try to basically hit pause and, after understanding what the customer is optimizing for, do a first articles, get that, charge a kind of a prototype price with the knowledge that we already have a PO for the larger kind of quantity after it. And then, it could also oftentimes be small one-offs too, that they're calling us and saying there is no larger run after this. This is prototype. And we do understand that we may have to work with customers more frequently to help them engineer the solution. So we definitely bake in extra costs into the project or stuff like that.
Got it. Are you helping with design services on the front end?
It varies, right? So the business we own now, it's a combination of three companies that kind of all had their own like little niches. Certain parts of those niches include you made this certain kind of a closure for electronics for 20 years. You've already done it a billion times. Just go make more. It's a SKU that you've been doing. It's a repeat part. Just go keep doing the same thing. And it's they just place a PO. And as long as you don't have a reason to adjust price for material or whatever, then it moves. The other end of the house, and frankly, where you have higher margins, is more highly engineered solutions, right? I'm not talking like rocket, engineering level, but something where you're going to spend a little time with the customer talking through the best practices of how to do this, how to do that to save parts. A great example is we're in the data center industry. We have a customer that makes these like large cabinets that house basically filtration systems that filter data centers from having problems, right? And Amazon and Microsoft are some of those customers. And when we got their product, even though that they literally make their product themselves too, we were able to even further say, hey, if you cut the sheet this way and make little puzzle piece tabs, then the pieces will just go together and you can't mess it up, and it saves on welding time, saves you guys costs, removes places where there's quality control issues. So we try to do stuff like that, so that design for manufacturing that tends to drive stickier long-term relationships once you do it that way.
Got it. How do minimum order quantities play a role in metal fabs?
What we try to do is have dollar value minimum orders, right?
Okay.
So it's not necessarily by quantity. I don't care if you ordered 1 or 50 or whatever. It's really like the dollar value of what it is mixed
Sure.
with like how easy is it to make without causing any like change requests on the floor. We messed up the quality. We got to remake it. Every 10 of these we make, we got to scrap one because it's so poorly designed. But we just keep dollar values as minimums. So I think that drives a lot of, protects us in a lot of ways. And then also margins, like where we see the margins are at the end of the day. If we could do something for our order minimum, but it's like 90% margin, we'll be pretty excited about that versus maybe something triple the size with a lot less margin.
Okay. What role has offshoring over the past 20 or 30 years played in terms of like what stays within American metal fabricators?
The tariffs and the whole reindustrialization trend have been some of the best stuff for the industry. I think long term and semi short term. And I'll explain. So, like historically, what's happened, and I'll talk maybe about California, maybe to start with. So, California like is known in the U.S. for having some of the best like mechanical, electrical, hardware engineers. And for that reason, a lot of the large equipment manufacturers, they keep an office here at the minimum that does design, if not often also final assembly. So parts will be ordered from all over the country sometimes locally too, right? And then it'll get assembled here. And normally our customers are making like something that's custom for their customer, right? And it's not fully custom, but like call it the bones are being built consistent for everybody. And then the odds and ends that make it unique are modified at the end. And the thing that happens is these odds and ends, they often have the highest margins baked in them, but they also need to have the quickest lead times to marry up with the bones that are being made to deliver the product on time. So oftentimes what's happening at least in California and probably in more of the US versus the outsourced stuff is we're getting more of the odds and ends often made here. And if you get enough of the odds and ends at the high margins, they end up being really, really good. With that said, I think what the tariffs have done is it's forced people to kind of start thinking backwards from the supply chain, right? So they've said, hey, I just got a shock at the minimum, whether or not tariffs go in or whatever. I got a shock at the minimum from COVID, from this, of like something that we've ignored for many, many years, which is supplier risk and diversity, right? And I think diversity, they probably spent more thinking time on, but the supplier risk, I think a lot of people haven't thought through. They said, well, what happens if an overseas supplier has an issue? What happens if tariffs come out of nowhere? What happens if I'm dealing with even a local supplier that's at retirement age, might already have, made enough money to retire and doesn't really care. Tomorrow they shut down, you're screwed, right? They've been making your part for 30 years. It's put a lot of light in that. So I think that's overall better for the macro, even though there was a lot of shock on the front end of like what's going to happen and people weren't sure how to allocate supply chains. And definitely it's improved. But what's also starting to happen, I think kind of earlier stages, what's going to happen more and more is these original equipment manufacturers, they're going to start moving more of the bones of the product back to the United States too. Eventually kind of working backwards from the last odds and ends. So I think we'll eventually see that. I will also say that at least for part of what we do too is in critical infrastructure, a lot of that stuff does need to be made in the United States anyway, US metal and all that. So at least that part of our business, I mean, I can't say there's been much of a change. I think infrastructure is probably the one thing that's always stayed consistent in history, oldest industry, and, politically, everybody agrees that we need better infrastructure and it always tends to get investment.
Yep, that makes sense. And that aligns with some of the conversations I have with other folks where kind of onshoring all of the critical manufacturing is a no-brainer. And then the question is kind of like, okay, in terms of the non-critical stuff, what can you make at a decent profit margin here with kind of American labor and prices?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, American labor, especially in California, you got to do stuff that's hard. We continue to try to encourage our people here to, think like, is this certified welding? Is there some sort of quality standard? Is this a product that we may have a patent for? Are we solving a business challenge by being able to deliver faster than anybody, even though the product's really easy? So we try to be more critical supply chain solution rather than, hey, I'm your average Joe on the block that can make the thing out of metal for you.
Sure. On that note, what does the typical org chart look like inside of a metal fab?
So it depends at scale. So your ideal that where I think you're like healthy and you can scale the business up a bit is kind of working from front end to back end. So I like to think with like department leaders. So I think honestly too, if you have good like management in the team versus like your main like GM or leader, you'll be 90% of the way there. When I say good, not only the right skills, but you have to make sure that their job roles are KPI'd to the things that matter for their department. So they get bonuses based on the KPIs and they have to basically earn their full salary and more rather than just you hand them their full salary and the bonuses are extra. But what we start off in the front end. So we have our sales department, right? So a lot of companies, they don't separate that out. As you scale, you want to separate that out. Our sales department wins the work, runs the CRM. As they're working to win the work, they're working estimating. So estimating is putting numbers on things. Sales is actually doing sales. This way you don't need technical people to do your sales. It's much harder to find someone that could do sales and estimating in one. Once you actually win the work then goes into like the engineering and planning department, which is this is something that if you get wrong, you're going to have a ton of problems. Those guys will sit there and basically IKEAify the project and say, how can I make this super, super simple? So by the time it hits the floor, there's no problems. Somewhere in the middle of that, your supply chain has ordered the material, sourced it, make sure you have the right stock, as well as your quality manager has put in, like inspection reports or just things to watch for, say, hey, just make sure you don't ruin these 5 critical dimensions or the customer will reject it. So then when it goes out into the floor, production takes over. Production, will produce the product. And then, you have maintenance teams in there that keep machines up and stuff like that. And then after the product is successfully produced, it'll go to, accounting and then just get collected. So HR, of course, would be maybe the other thing you had missed there. And then if you can have a really strong leader at the top to kind of tie all those departments together, that's a good formula for scale.
Sure. And within production, what are the key roles? I imagine like welding is one, sheet cutting is another.
Yeah. So kind of starting from the top. So actually the way we run production, we have two production leads, two production managers. One we call a production manager, the other one we call production control. So production control is more of like operations that day, start and end, jobs that day, make sure they ship. They're driving revenue dollars. They're running around debugging issues. At least in our business, we have someone who's a degreed engineer, project manager by background that can make calls on the spot. He was an estimator here. He did sales. He knows how to make stuff, basically. He would basically be driving product out the door and trying to work towards a plan to hit revenue goals for the month. The production management side is more of the one that oversees the largest headcount of people, right? So that side of the house, it's got one leader that's doing planning, strategic thinking, dealing with HR issues related to the department, performance reviews, hiring. They have supervisors under them per shift. And then they have, under those supervisors, each team has a lead, welding lead, finishing lead, machining lead. So you have that. And then each shift also gets what they call a material expediter. So there's someone that's responsible for basically physically moving material around the facility. This guy's done, move it to the next guy kind of thing. Make sure we're keeping the flow and the push system. And then the other part of it is they're also keeping the ERP clean as well too, making sure that if at any point in time you log in, you got the right data. We're closing jobs that we finished, marking stuff that needs support, like that. So that's really a formula per shift,
Gotcha.
and then you just run that at scale.
Interesting. And what is the role that's most difficult to hire for?
Production leaders, if I had to tell you, like for example, like a welding lead or a lead of any like technical department is always harder, right? Because they have to sit there simultaneously clock in direct labor hours of their own product being made, as they call it, the most senior authority out of everybody in that department. But they also have to be like knowledgeable enough to sit in front of a email and spreadsheet and actually talk to like a schedule, right? Because production control, they give the schedule of operations that have to get done that day to those leads, and their responsibility is to crank those out that day.
Sure.
So they have those leads, like, it's always tougher, right? Because sometimes you find people that are fantastic, let's say welders, but they don't know how to speak English, or they've never used an email or whatever, right? So it's just, it's getting too much of variety in one person oftentimes is where you have difficulty in hiring versus hiring someone for the office. I mean, there's always someone you can get for the office, pull one
Sure.
from a bigger company or whatever if you need to.
You hear a lot and read a lot about how much the labor shortage has hurt American manufacturing. How have you all seen that play out at Industrial Succession?
I think when it comes to the manufacturing, the question is like, what are you manufacturing, right? Like if you're manufacturing highly specialized material that like 10 people in this country know how to work on, yeah, you're going to have a labor shortage issue for sure. It's probably going to only get worse, right? When you make metal, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that know how to make it. A lot of operators. I mean, you can teach people. It's, even like go to formal schools. A lot like our industry, for example, it's got the American Welding Society. There's, formal departments. The manufacturers of equipment have formal training programs. Like you can get people educated enough. And honestly, the more modern of equipment that you do procure, the more often they have automation tools that remove some of the technical need from the job. And then in the welding world, I'd say that's probably the toughest because it is still a lot of manual welding. I do think the industry is developing more automated tools that are helping with that. But that is probably the hardest art to find. And welders, they're humans, not machines. So you're going to have the hardest predictability there on throughputs and stuff like that.
Given that you see so many shops and you've acquired a number yourself, what pieces of advice or red flags would you kind of outline for buyers or investors looking at the space?
It's a challenging market to get started in because a lot of the industry is built off high customer concentration and high owner involvement right out of the gate, right? So the challenge is you buy like if you're starting in this today, number one, there's just more competition depending on what market you're in. But the deals that are available often have that high level of risk. And of course, customer concentration can really, hurt you in any kind of business that you buy. On top of that, it's not all contractually recurring. You may have revenue that's, long-term agreements. Sure, they may have stipulations where they deem back out, but oftentimes it's that. And then it's also, you oftentimes have to go find the next thing that you're going to work on, right? It's not call it like someone that's signing up for a credit card recurring charge, and the thing just basically shows up. I think you can probably think of ways to make it like that. So, that is where you will eventually think and go. But I do think that for the most part, that's the big part of the industry. So I think when someone's buying, it's like buyer beware on the front end of that and diligence that accordingly. I think it's sometimes tough to understand if the revenue that is there is more project based one off or more kind of consistent to be expected. That could also hurt, and as long as, because at the end of the day, as long as you have revenue and somewhat of a consistent gross margin, and you know how to get more revenue, you could solve a lot of problems, right? You have more levers to play with. But if all of a sudden you're in a niche industry with high customer concentration, this really niche customer leads you, you don't know how to get more revenue, you're going to, have problems really, really fast. The other thing too is I think in certain markets, the bar for the amount of revenue that you have to be considered even like a business in metal fab versus, an owner operated small little facility is very different numbers. So I think understanding what that number is will help you avoid a lot of the problems. But kind of where our minds are at these days now is we look for businesses where we understand the products that they're making first. So how long have they been making them? How crucial? Because if you have that, even customer concentration, you can get comfortable with pretty fast, right? If it's a key, a single source product for Boeing or something, you're probably not going to lose them that easily. You have to really mess some stuff up. So I think that's been where it's at. And then also we target a lot of companies that have AS9100 or ISO quality standards already built in, where, those quality procedures, not only are the industry standard and a lot of people know how to work with them, but they also, it kind of extend to be more of a business process of how you run a manufacturing facility entirely. So when you try to run that facility, it's cleaner, more process driven. It's easier to get consultants and people to help you because everyone's on the same page. But then also M&A is a lot easier. If you choose to scale through M&A, combining two targets that are already seeing quality certs are wildly easier than not.
That takes us into your thesis at industrial succession. Obviously, you have a ton of learnings. You outlined some of the challenges for buyers in this space. What is your grand vision and where are you guys today?
Yeah. So I'm a mechanical aero engineer originally from New York. And the early days of this thesis started when I moved out to California and started working in industrial tech. So I saw how large and vibrant the industrial market is on this side of the country, but also saw how antiquated it is. And I think, I became very passionate about like driving industrial innovation and saw that like starting a tech company to affect that was quite hard. And I knew that reindustrialization, all that stuff would eventually happen. But, being a tech company was probably a really slow, tough way to do that. So that was kind of the thesis, find like, kind of lower market industrials, buy as many as we can, try to have a roll up structure that gets into scale and tech enable them. And everything we would do, every decision would really be baked in like, if we were going to try to sell this company in some amount of years, like, for whatever enterprise value, what would make this business easier for a large strategic to absorb, right? How would they think, right? What would they pay more of a premium for the convenience and luxury? Well, number one, those strategics, they're not going to come in and consolidate a fragmented market on the other side of the country, even though that they know that they want to have a geographical presence in the largest manufacturing state. And they know that a lot of customers order locally. They're not going to go out and do that consolidation when, 6,000 metal fabs in California and only 200 or over 20 million in revenue, right? How many of those 20 million already bought up? Good chunk too. So, our thesis was very much build a network of metal fabrication facilities for the sector that you would buy the largest plant you could in every major metro, buy smaller targets that you would physically relocate into that building over time that would effectively take their gross margin and make it your creative EBITDA and save on a lot of SG&A in that case. And get better customers, diversity, all the typical things with roll-ups.
That's awesome and very much needed in the country. And what type of sellers do y'all like to work with?
We often like to work with those like family businesses that frankly, they're going to just end up shutting down. A lot of what's happening in California too, that might not be publicly noted, that is really exacerbating the succession issue, is a lot of our industrial business owners, they own their own industrial building. A lot of them bought the building back in the day when it was really, really cheap. They didn't think anything of it. It was kind of just like a cost control mechanism. And all of a sudden, e-commerce goes nuts on the West Coast, and these buildings are now often worth like 8 figures with 7-figure businesses, value businesses in them. So a lot of our sellers, like money is not even the object. They often will say, "Hey, I'll sell it to you for pretty much balance sheet value up front, and some seller note earn out for the rest." A lot of them are just like really. We hear this a lot. They get excited about the mission. They're like, "We know success in California equals M&A and getting to scale as fast as you can." And while I don't need the money and I'm kind of too old to want to do this, and my kid doesn't want to do this, I like what you guys are doing and really would like my business to be a contribution to the overall success and pie. And that's why I think we get a lot of our deals very well priced, fairly priced. That gives us a lot of room to drive that scale. And owners are still happy because they do get a lot of industrial building value at the end. So we love folks like that, and folks that want to support us go forward.
What are the key milestones this year that you're looking forward to?
So what we've done so far, we started in Orange County. We bought 3 facilities there that formed our current operating company, Penn Manufacturing. So that's our mostly water treatment over there, and data centers. Those are the 2 kind of industries. We do a lot of other stuff too, but that's what it is. So we're currently closing on our LA facility, which is what we're on Main Street for too. So it's 2 facilities that are 2 brands in the same facility that service infrastructure as well. So transit and telecommunications. So we're really pumped about that. That's probably like before August 2025 close. We'd like to buy 2 more deals by the end of this year that we have under LOI. One is in the Bay Area, and already established plant that has all the kind of things I've been mentioning on this call that brings us into the tech industry, more semiconductors, equipment, testing, manufacturing equipment, testing equipment. And then another one in Riverside County that brings a few like energy customers and a lot more of that automated machinery, laser towers and laser welders and stuff like that. Stuff that I think will really enhance our kind of overall enterprise value over time due to better equipment. So those would be really like very happy goals for this year.
Amazing. Well, no pun intended. It sounds like you guys have your work cut out for you. So
yeah, we do. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for making some time to chat with me, Jules. It was great hearing about what y'all are doing at Industrial Succession, and we're definitely rooting for you over here at Mainshares.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.